Good evening, I'm Adrienne Arsenault.
And I'm Andrew Chang. Tonight, promising vaccine news. Early word, Pfizer says its shot appears to protect against Omicron.
Well, these are very good news.
But the variant is spreading fast, feared to be dominant in the UK within a month. And what about Canada? The doctors are standing by.
Canadian diplomats will boycott the Beijing Games.
We have been very clear of our deep concerns around human rights.
But the athletes will go, and there are some real security concerns.
A former Canadian Space Agency engineer under arrest.
We do consider this to be a matter of foreign actor interference.
How the RCMP allege he was helping China.
And settling a very Canadian debate. What is worse, a dry or a wet cold?
Wet, because it gets to the bone. Dry, there's no moisture.
The answer might just surprise you. This is The National. The Omicron variant is spreading around the world and across this country, and with it, worry is growing too.
Globally, some old COVID restrictions are making a comeback to try to slow Omicron's reach as scientists race to understand it. Tonight, it's all prompting this call to action from the World Health Organization.
The steps countries take today and in the coming days and weeks will determine how Omicron unfolds. Any complacency now will cost lives.
It's asking governments to increase surveillance, testing, and sequencing of the virus, saying the time to contain Omicron is now.
And one glance at this map shows that will not be easy. The variant is now confirmed in at least 54 countries and reported in 3 more.
And one of the key questions is whether the vaccines we already have are effective against this variant's mutations. And on that today, there is progress. Christine Birak with how one drug maker says its shot holds up.
Scientists say it's clear. Our immune defenses against Omicron are dropping. The question is, how much protection do vaccines still offer us? Pfizer is now saying 2 shots are good, 3 are better.
Well, these are very good news.
In a press release, the drug maker says preliminary lab studies demonstrate that 3 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine neutralize the Omicron variant. Adding 2 doses may still induce protection against severe disease. Still, the company's CEO says he's not ruling out a brand new shot.
The current booster will be enough to maintain protection. But if we need one, I'm sure we can make one. And the good news is that we will have it by March.
What we really need now is a coordinated research effort and not jumping to conclusions on, study by study.
The World Health Organization warns only a few studies have been done so far. All of them have only looked at how well one part of the immune system, neutralizing antibodies, attack Omicron. But there are other parts of the immune system that can still shut this variant down.
I think it's premature to conclude that this reduction in neutralizing activity would result in a significant reduction in vaccine effectiveness. We do not know that.
The WHO says anyone who hasn't been vaccinated needs a shot, but isn't convinced 3rd doses or boosters are needed yet.
I understand the skepticism about seeing a data that comes from the drug company.
Even if our current vaccines are effective, many experts insist immunity wanes. Another shot can slow the spread of this variant and better protect older adults.
What we know so far is enough to raise our level of concern to the point where we should start considering those 3rd doses for people who are eligible.
Okay, so we're learning about Pfizer's response to Omicron, but Christine, what do we know about how other vaccines perform?
The short answer is not much. There are no studies yet looking at antibodies taken from people who got Moderna, AstraZeneca, or mixed doses to see how well those antibodies fight Omicron in the lab. But experts we spoke with say they anticipate the results will be similar to what we've seen from Pfizer. And most Canadians will be offered a 3rd shot 6 months after their 2nd. And based on what they're seeing, scientists say when that shot is offered to you, you should take it.
All right, thanks, Christine.
You're welcome.
So here's a sense of just how fast Omicron is spreading. Today, UK health officials said the variant will become the dominant strain by Christmas. The government is bringing in new restrictions to try to slow transmission. But as Chris Brown tells us, just as politicians are asking for the public's help, the Prime Minister is facing a credibility crisis.
The optics are horrible for Boris Johnson, trying to fend off a surging new COVID variant in the midst of a crisis of public confidence.
I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules. I apologise unreservedly.
His fictional party was a business meeting.
A leaked video filmed a year ago appears to show Downing Street staffers at a mock news conference laughing about holding a Christmas gathering when just about everyone else in Britain was locked down.
What's the answer?
I don't know. It wasn't a party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not.
Johnson continues to deny there was a party, but the video suggests otherwise.
Millions of people now think the Prime Minister was taking them for fools and that they were lied to. They're right, aren't they?
Can you stop, please?
Allegra Stratton, the staffer at the centre of the controversy, resigned in tears outside of her home.
I will regret those remarks for the rest of my days.
This isn't just about Johnson's government looking bad, though. The concern is that fury over the apparent double standard could undermine efforts to fight the Omicron variant.
In England, it's estimated that Omicron is doubling every 2 to 3 days.
Christina Poggle says though Omicron is poised to become the dominant COVID variant by Christmas, she believes Britons will continue to behave responsibly.
And I kind of tend to think, to be honest, that the people are better than their leaders. And that, you have to emphasize that you do these things for each other and not because you're told to.
Still, at this London pharmacy where people were getting booster shots, anger over the alleged Christmas party was evident.
I think it's massively hypocritical. I think it's really rich for the government to give us rules that we have to follow and they're not following them themselves.
I see it honestly as a bit of a betrayal.
But from Monday, you should work from home if you can.
Tonight, from the same Downing Street studio where that mock news conference was filmed, Boris Johnson announced new restrictions, including working from home again, as he tried to push past the crisis. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
An apology, too, today from Finland's Prime Minister. She went to a crowded bar after learning she'd been exposed to COVID-19. Sanna Marin spent the night out Saturday despite being alerted that her foreign minister had tested positive. Both had been in a meeting room with colleagues the day before. Marin has since tested negative.
Well, here in Canada, COVID-19 cases are continuing their climb upwards. Canada reported another 3,500 plus new infections today, up over 560 from yesterday. Again, mostly driven by Ontario and Quebec. As for severe cases, hospitalizations are holding fairly steady at just over 1,500, as are ICU cases at just under 450.
Manitoba's COVID surge is pushing its healthcare system to the brink. A third of all ICU beds are now taken up by COVID patients, and more keep coming. It is so bad the province is looking at canceling even more surgeries just to keep up. Cameron McIntosh takes us inside.
Again, pressure is building up in Manitoba's ICUs, resulting in more surgeries and more testing being delayed. Sick of waiting, Max Johnson went to Lithuania to have his knee replaced.
I mean, they could call it a wait list, but it's not a waiting list. You're simply put into this corral with a lot of other people with dodgy joints and told to wait.
Doctors Manitoba estimates 152,000 surgeries and diagnostic procedures have been canceled or delayed since the start of the pandemic. The province says it doesn't actually know.
We don't have a good information management system to know who is waiting to be seen.
Today, the health minister announced a task force to find solutions. A plan to get a plan, which could include sending some urgent cases out of province.
No stone will be left unturned to ensure that we are providing Manitobans with the care they need right here at home.
Meanwhile, Manitoba can't staff the same number of ICU beds it had in the spring. Frontline staff are burning out.
We have patient ratios where nurses are looking after more patients than they're really supposed to. And people are worried that that the situation is becoming unsafe. Well, not becoming, that it is unsafe.
The majority of those new ICU cases are unvaxxed. In some parts of the province, the full vaccination rate remains stubbornly below 60%.
The backlog will stop growing once we stop having 200 patients a day.
At this point, it's unlikely there will be a surge in vaccination. Johnson says Manitoba has simply waited too long to address this.
You can tell the people who came up with that idea are not sitting on their couches in debilitating pain, waiting for an operation that could be done in 3 weeks' time.
Now, amid promises today of finding creative solutions and thinking outside of the box, missing today was an actual timetable. Those wait lists are growing. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
In other news, Canadian government officials will not be in attendance when Canada competes at the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Canada is joining other allies in a diplomatic boycott of the Games, taking aim at China's human rights record. But as David Cochrane explains, the move does come with concern for the safety of athletes who do go.
When China last hosted the Olympics in 2008, it put on a grand display for the world. Canada sent an official delegation to those games. This time, they will watch from home.
We are extremely concerned by the repeated human rights violations by the Chinese government. That is why we are announcing today that we will not be sending any diplomatic representation to the Beijing Olympic or Paralympic Games this winter.
With the diplomatic boycott, Canada matches what the U.S. announced on Monday and joins other allies such as Australia and the United Kingdom. China's foreign ministry dismissed it as political grandstanding, saying the politicians and diplomats weren't invited in the first place.
Canada.
The athletes, however, are invited and will still go.
They have trained hours, they've traveled the world, they've competed, and it's just normal for them to have the chance to really go ahead and compete in these Olympic Games.
It's unclear if letting the athletes go while keeping the diplomats home will have an impact on China's actions. But in the tense Canada-China relationship, it raises another concern.
Concerns around arbitrary detention are real.
The living example of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor puts a spotlight on security concerns, with the government vowing extra measures to keep Canadian athletes safe.
There's already agents that have been hired to ensure the security of the athletes, and we're still in discussion with the RCMP.
Despite those concerns, the Canadian Olympic and Paralympic committees issued statements saying allowing the athletes to compete is the right move, arguing that athlete boycotts only hurt athletes without creating meaningful change. David Cochrane, CBC News, Ottawa.
Security concerns related to China are at the heart of new charges laid by the RCMP. A former engineer at the Canadian Space Agency is accused of using that position to benefit a Chinese aerospace company. Here's Travis Danraj with what we know tonight.
And from my
Back in February, Wanping Zhang was eager to talk about satellites with the space community in Iceland.
About 2 years ago, we came to Iceland, to talk to local people there to see is any possibility we can build a ground station there.
But now, the former Canadian Space Agency engineer is charged with breach of trust by a public officer. The RCMP alleged the 61-year-old used his position to bolster Chinese efforts to install satellite stations in Iceland.
All of this was done to facilitate the advantage of a Chinese aeronautic company, and we do consider this to be a matter of foreign actor interference.
The investigation was launched in 2019 after the CSA flagged suspicious information to INSET, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, responsible for finding and stopping foreign interference.
Clearly, the intention here is the RCMP wants to, bring a stop to the activities of this individual, lay criminal charges, and they feel it's, serious enough that they needed to do that.
In a statement today, the Canadian Space Agency said it took action, including an internal inquiry and restricting access to information. Chang was then fired.
We're going to let the investigation follow through, and we'll certainly act on any findings that come from that investigation to make sure that we adopt best practices to protect our agencies.
China knows that Canada is a source of technology. In space, we have some niche applications that are very useful. And in fact, this is just a reminder that we have to be a lot more vigilant to counter what I would call cyber espionage.
The Canadian Space Agency says it is continuing to strengthen security measures to protect against threats, including improper disclosure of information. Zhang is scheduled to appear in court next week. Travis Stanrash, CBC News, Ottawa.
French police now say an arrest in connection to the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi was a case of mistaken identity. A Saudi man has been released after being detained at an airport in Paris. Authorities say he was mistakenly linked to the 2018 killing of Khashoggi after a scan of his passport triggered an alert. His name matched that of a former member of the Saudi Royal Guard.
In the U.S., lawmakers have big tech in their crosshairs, and today it was Instagram's turn in the hot seat. Instagram, owned by the same parent company as Facebook. In Congress today, Instagram's CEO was grilled after a whistleblower alleged the platform was damaging to teenagers. Katie Simpson takes us through the fiery testimony.
Adam Massari knew he was about to face a grilling and tried to lower the temperature with his opening statement.
Now I recognize that many in this room have deep reservations about our company, but I want to assure you that we do have the same goal. We all want teens to be safe online.
His plan didn't work.
You're the new tobacco, whether you like it or not. Instagram sees a $sign when it sees kids.
Stop the destructive, toxic content.
Senators are demanding transparency and change in light of whistleblower testimony and documents alleging Instagram exposes teens to harmful content that can hurt their mental health and that it purposely tries to hook users.
Do you make more money when people spend more time on your platform or less?
Senator, on average, we make more money when people spend more time on our platform because we're an advertising business. Right.
Massari defended Instagram, pointing to the newly introduced parental controls, saying the company spends billions of dollars on safety measures and that other tech giants are facing the same problems.
This is an industry-wide challenge and requires industry-wide solutions and industry-wide standards.
Lawmakers warned they are ready to take action.
Legislation is coming.
But in the final moments of his testimony, Massari was asked to address the families of kids harmed by Instagram.
If any individual harms themselves or has a negative experience on our platform, that's something that I take incredibly seriously.
His words again did not satisfy the room.
And we are asking you, have some empathy and take some responsibility. And it seems as if you just can't get on that path.
On top of new legislation or regulations, some senators are calling for Meta, the parent company of Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, to be broken up as a way to rein in the tech giant. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
One person is dead after a car got stuck in the rushing rapids on the American side of Niagara Falls. So that is the U.S. Coast Guard completing a daring operation to recover a body from that submerged vehicle. No word yet on how the car got into the Niagara River. Authorities say the driver was a woman in her 60s who lived in the area.
Well, it was an emotional day in a Calgary courtroom with a guilty plea in the death of a decorated police officer. Sergeant Andrew Harnett died last New Year's Eve after being dragged by a vehicle fleeing a routine traffic stop. Carolyn Dunn has the details and the reaction from a grieving family.
An emotional Amir Abdul Rahman apologized and asked for forgiveness from the family and friends of Andrew Harnett, as well as his own family.
He is so sorry for their loss, so sorry that this has happened, so sorry for them that he had any part of this whatsoever.
Are we in any position to offer forgiveness right now? No.
Still, Harnett's older brother Jason says the family appreciates Abdul Rahman's apology.
You feel the weight on your shoulders and walking into a courtroom, the seriousness, and it brings everything back again to life. And all the emotions with it.
Abdul Rahman was originally charged with first-degree murder before pleading guilty to manslaughter. The Crown would like him to serve 8 to 9 years. His defense lawyer says 2 years in prison plus 2 years probation is just. But there is no argument about what happened last New Year's Eve when Sergeant Andrew Harnett stopped a vehicle because its headlights weren't on. Abdul Rahman was in the passenger seat. A 17-year-old was driving. The car took off. Abdul Rahman grabbed the wheel 3 times, steering the vehicle while the driver allegedly tried to kick Harnett off. Harnett was thrown into incoming traffic and struck by another car. He died in hospital. His wife, pregnant at the time, now left to raise their child alone. A mother left with 37 years of memories. A police officer laid to rest too soon.
He loved it. He loved being a cop. He loved this city.
The driver of the SUV, whom we can't name because he was a youth at the time of Harnett's death, is still facing first-degree murder charges. His trial is set to begin early next year. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
Journalist Maria Ressa is out on bail and tonight out of the Philippines to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. I can't imagine what it feels like for you to have landed there.
It's exhilarating. I'm more emotional than I normally am.
Ahead tonight, what her win could mean for journalists under threat around the world.
The doctors are here to break down what we do and don't know about Omicron and whether it's time to cancel those holiday plans.
You don't have to do all the gatherings all the time with all the people.
And after the break, the push to cut downtown parking in Canada's biggest city.
People are always afraid that there won't be any parking, but that's foolish.
We're back in 2. The bill banning conversion therapy in Canada is now law. It received royal assent from the Governor General today after being fast-tracked by both the House and the Senate. The bill makes it a criminal offense to force someone into the widely discredited practice.
Well, the City of Toronto is considering a new proposal that supporters say could see fewer cars on the road and more affordable housing. It's all about parking in downtown condos. But as Jamie Strachan tells us, some say the idea could cause more problems than it solves.
For some condo dwellers in Toronto's congested downtown core, having a place to park is important.
Why would I spend money on a condo and then go somewhere else to park my car?
For others, not so much.
Because I don't drive. I don't like driving in the city. It's not an easy thing to do.
Currently, all new condos must provide some parking. The city hopes to remove that requirement, and the initiative isn't purely environmental.
We want to make it easier for people to not own a car because that can help them save on their housing costs.
Currently, about 30% of spots valued at more than $150,000 are not used.
People who may not need parking are actually then forced to buy that parking stall just because it comes with the unit, and that's really where we feel this will help affordability.
A number of residents' associations oppose the idea. Concerned condo dwellers will crowd busy streets.
They're going to find places on the street and deny people who live in those areas street parking, which is their right.
Many other cities have already done this, including Edmonton. So too have London, Mexico City, and San Francisco. Experts say these experiments have allowed developers to match parking with actual demand and, in some cases, reduce the cost of condo living.
People are always afraid that there won't be any parking, but that's foolish to think that developers are not going to take into account that some of their residents are willing to pay for a parking space.
This isn't a war on cars, say proponents, simply an acknowledgement that things like ride sharing and bike sharing have reduced the demand for cars in the core. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
Canadian athlete Damien Warner is being honored as Canada's Athlete of the Year.
I was warming up for my shot put today, and my coach and my manager and a couple others came over and shared a video from Damien Cox, and he was the one that kind of broke the news to me, and it's an incredible honor.
And the news is he won the Lou Marsh Trophy, beating several other extraordinary competitors. At the Tokyo Olympics last summer, the 32-year-old from London, Ontario, became the first Canadian to ever win the decathlon. And Tiger Woods will make his comeback to golf next week. He won't be doing it alone. He will be competing with his son Charlie at the PNC Championship. That's a tournament that pairs top golfers with family members. This will be Woods' first competition since being seriously injured in a car crash in February.
Well, next, the doctors are here to talk about what we know about Omicron and what it means for your holiday plans.
Plus, how do you compete with a neighbor like this? The story behind this friendly next-door rivalry a little later.
Are you ready for the greatest day of your lives?
School is out and it's time for our summer annual block party.
It's the Blockbuster, baby!
Dad, chill.
You know I'm unable to chill.
Welcome back. The holidays are just around the corner, but Omicron has the potential to change things in a pretty big way, especially when it comes to holiday plans. So let's try to understand where we're at exactly with infectious diseases specialist Dr. Susie Hota in Toronto and Dr. Lisa Barrett in Halifax. Hello to the both of you. Dr. Hota, I'm going to start with you. We know Omicron has the capacity to spread very quickly, right? Its mutations hint at that possibility. So does its doubling rate in different parts of the world. So in Canada, Do we believe this will become the dominant strain?
It is certainly very possible. I mean, if you look at what's happened in the Gauteng province of South Africa, the doubling time is 2 to 3 days. It's risen exponentially in that population. But there are a few caveats to that. For example, we've just kind of learned more recently in a study that people can get reinfected with this variant more easily than with other variants. And so at least some of that rise might actually reflect reinfections on top of potentially some increased transmissibility. So I think we need to wait and see what plays out in other jurisdictions, including here in Canada, and look at what that secondary attack rate is in households where people have been in contact with cases or in workplaces and other settings, and get a better sense of what that transmissibility risk is and how it interacts with Delta, because Delta levels were kind of low in South Africa at the time that Omicron took off. So I think it's important to see what happens here.
Before we get to the question of reinfection, which I think is a pretty important one, Dr. Barrett, can I ask you just about, at a basic level, Omicron's severity? Because the initial kind of anecdotal evidence from frontline doctors in South Africa was that the symptoms seemed milder than Delta, and we are about 2 weeks out, right, from the initial discovery. Is there good reason to believe that Omicron is milder than Delta?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're really going to have to work on figuring this out, because we don't want to jump to conclusions, and this is a very important part of what we're doing. So the first part to answer your question is, number one, we really have seen from the data that's come out in South Africa that it does appear to be some younger folks who are getting infected or reinfected, to Dr. Hoda's point. And those folks seem to be having a somewhat milder set of symptoms. However, we also don't really know if those folks have been re-exposed, how many of them have been re-exposed in the past. And the keen part here is that, as mentioned previously, Delta wasn't around as much. And did that create a different environment? So early suggestion that perhaps this is milder, but I certainly wouldn't say that we should extrapolate that to being an Omicron characteristic yet. We really do need to presume that there will be at least as much severity for the moment, but hopeful that maybe it may be at least just about the same or a little less.
Dr. Barrett, when it comes to Omicron's ability to reinfect people who've already been sick from COVID, what is the big picture consequence of that? Because I suspect that will matter particularly to those people who may believe that they have immunity because they've been sick prior, compared to those who have immunity because they've been vaccinated.
Yeah, we definitely want folks to recognize and know that if you've had what we call natural infection, or you've been exposed, had the disease, and have recovered, that you are not protected from this particular variant. And while that may be true for Delta in certain cases, we know that right now vaccine is still your best bet in terms of not getting sick and not having a poor outcome when it comes to COVID, period. And that's likely to be at least the case, if not more, with Omicron. Although we are still, and I will say this a lot, we are still gaining a lot more information at the moment. So be prepared for things to change as we go along.
Okay, so point taken. In the even shorter term, because I know a lot of people are thinking about the holidays, this is probably the number one question we continue to get. Should I cancel my plane ticket? Should I cancel my train ticket? Should I cancel my large family gathering or even my small family gathering? Dr. Hoda, what would you say to that person if they need to make such a decision sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of gatherings, we're not at a point where I feel like we have to cancel all gatherings, but we should be mindful of the size of the gatherings. And, some of this is because we're still facing Delta rises. And we haven't even considered what it's going to look like with Omicron in the picture as well. And so I do think we need to think about smaller numbers of contacts in order to get through the next several months. And also be very prudent in terms of the environment where you're going to get together with people. So consider some outdoor gatherings along with indoor. What's the ventilation going to be like? Keep a window open. No vaccination statuses. Get the third doses or boosters if you're eligible to get one prior to these gatherings. Let's try to mitigate the risk as much as possible going into the holidays. Travel's a bit more tricky. I think it's very difficult for a lot of people to change their plans at this point. And so again, it's about risk mitigation, knowing the environment you're going into and deciding what's happening in that country or that area, getting travel insurance, being prepared for changes that might happen really quickly, and the possibility of having to quarantine when you come back.
And Dr. Barrett, I want to ask you the same question. I mean, ideally, we could just all take a wait and see approach until we have more information. But if you had to give someone guidance right now, what would it be?
Yeah, the wait and see plan with COVID is exactly what we've learned we really shouldn't do. We don't have to lock down, but I think it's exceptionally important to think about what you're doing. Take a moderate approach. You don't have to do all the gatherings all the time with all the people. Some gatherings, some of the time with some of the people. And really, if you have access to some additional layers of protection, including that booster or third dose, and also some testing, make use of all the tools in your toolbox. Stay home if you're sick, and really encourage your friends and families to make sure that they're all vaccinated when they get together.
Good advice, good information, as always. Dr. Barrett, Dr. Hoda, we'll have to have this conversation again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, a conversation with journalist Maria Ressa. She faces jail for her work in the Philippines, but tonight she is preparing to receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
It's exhilarating. I'm more emotional than I normally am, but
what she says her win means for journalists and democracies around the world.
I'm Anastasia Busas, host of Player's Own Voice, the podcast where athletes come to share their experiences and perspectives. Get the real story in the Player's Own Voice Available with CBC Listen and wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for helping us shine the light. It's thrilling to be here.
That was Oslo, Norway today, a moment of triumph for journalist Maria Ressa, who's from the Philippines, on what is a very, very special week. So she is there to receive the Nobel Peace Prize on Friday, alongside another journalist, Dmitry Muratov. No one from the Philippines has ever won it before, no journalist since 1936. She's being honored for her efforts to safeguard freedom of expression. She's a vocal critic of Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, and he of her work. Ressa has been tried in the courts and faces the prospect of prison. Today, from Oslo, she carved out a little time to talk with us.
I guess the first thing I want to say, obviously, congratulations. And I can't imagine what it feels like for you to have landed there.
It's exhilarating. I'm more emotional than I normally am, but I think part of it is that when you feel like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill, it's okay when you keep rolling the rock up the hill, but when someone actually lifts the burden and helps you push, you can relax a little bit, then you begin to see, I'm getting emotional. Then you begin to realize what you've gone through. It's been 5 tough years. You know that. You came to the Philippines and saw what we've gone through. I hope that this will be a call to action.
Maria Ressa almost didn't get on that plane to Oslo. It wasn't until a day or so before the flight that the courts granted her permission to go. She's out on bail after a conviction. Journalism is not a crime, but when her online media site Rappler started asking questions, exposing wrongdoing, calling out disinformation from the government, Ressa was deemed a criminal in the Philippines, charged with cyber libel for an article she did not write, published before the law first came into effect. Charge after charge keeps landing. Another libel complaint filed even as she was boarding the plane.
What is it that is happening that is getting under their skin so much?
Rappler wasn't the first news organization attacked by President Duterte. We were the third. The first was the largest newspaper, then the largest television station. We're the largest online news group. This is my 35th year as a journalist. I know the whys, why we do what we do. I helped write the standards and ethics manuals of 4 news organizations. And so, I know where the line is, and I feel like the government's trying to bulldoze us to step back so that they gain more power. And they do it through the information ecosystem and the law, the weaponization of the law. So why are we under attack? Another journalist was killed in the Philippines, someone I knew, so that brings the death toll to at least 22 people under the Duterte administration. And the lawyers who defend us in court, more of them have been killed. That's at least 63.
She is relentless in expressing the need for press freedom and the need for journalists to defend it. Was having that very conversation on a panel in the fall when her phone rang. You can see her taking the call here, wisely muting herself, because on the other end was the Nobel Committee.
You are awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2021.
Oh my gosh, this is, I'm speechless.
Keeping it private for the rest of the panel until word was released. It was a lovely moment, but can a Nobel Peace Prize change anything?
I can already tell you it has. It was a lift, not just for journalists in the Philippines, but for so many journalists all around the world. My friends in Venezuela, Rosemary Reyes, friends in Indonesia, in Hong Kong, in Myanmar. So journalists felt the lift, but then beyond that, in the Philippines, all of a sudden, journalists who were quieter became not so quiet. It gave voice to so many who were quiet. And that's amazing. And I hope that globally, they help the citizens in our democracies understand why what we do is important and that they need to jump in and help democracy stay alive.
So there will be people watching this from the privileged position of Canada, potentially seeing this as a problem of another place. What are they missing?
It's your problem as well. I've said since 2016, our dystopian present is your future. Look, the journalism and technology, the old and the new gatekeepers impact everyone, every citizen in a democracy. And whether you know it or not, if you're on social media, it has become a behavior modification system. And you are Pavlov's dogs. We have become Pavlov's dogs. So trying to deal with that insidious manipulation, to try to get to the facts, that's your problem. I hope this will be a call to action. That's what I hope to do. We can either go further into the descent into tyranny or collectively act like the world did post-World War II and change the world.
Thank you so much for making time. I know you didn't have it. We'll all be watching you on Friday.
Thank you. Thanks. It's good to see you again.
Well, congratulations indeed. And she seems so optimistic, right? Especially for someone who knows. I mean, of course she knows that when she goes home, she could face jail time.
Yeah, she could be in big trouble. Both those things are true. The optimism, the risks, yes, but the optimism that the Nobel Committee chose journalists for the first time in more than 50 years tells her that this fight for facts is recognized and respected. And that in addition to oppressive regimes, she's saying it loud and clear, the social media companies that let disinformation fester are on notice. I promise you, her speech on Friday will be something.
We'll be watching for that. Time for a quick break, but up next, a Canadian debate that seems to happen every winter.
Wet cold, dry cold. Which is worse? Which makes you a tougher Canadian?
The answer perhaps usually depends on where you live, but what does the science say? That's next.
Are you ready for the greatest day of your lives?
School is out and it's time for our summer annual block party.
It's the Blockbuster, baby!
Dad, chill.
You know I'm unable to chill.
I'm Angela Starrett. Tomorrow on CBC's Daily News podcast, Front Burner, the world scrambles to find a diplomatic solution as Russian troops mass on the Ukrainian border. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. As we head into winter, you might have had this oh-so-Canadian debate. What's worse, a wet cold or a dry cold? It turns out people have lots to say about it.
Absolutely a wet cold, because then you just get damp, get even more cold. It just keeps getting worse.
Dry. Wet, because it gets to the bone.
It feels like it gets into your bones.
I have to say dry, actually.
It's like there's no moisture, so it's just freezing. Is it dry cold right now?
Wet, shivers.
Wet.
What?
Yeah. That's a wet, not dry. Oh no, I mean dry, not wet.
Okay, so that certainly doesn't settle it. So to try to settle it, we are going to bring in the meteorologists, and the science might surprise you.
Well, thanks to that big Arctic air mass, we're going to have some cold temperatures coming in, but at least it's a dry cold. Temperatures... Whoa. Every winter, we hear the same debate. Wet cold, dry cold. Which is worse? Which makes you a tougher Canadian? We all make the same comparison, but does it actually hold up? The science says no. The moisture actually doesn't make a noticeable difference. And here's why. When we're talking about damp versus dry air, we're talking about the humidity. The relative humidity is the amount of water vapor in the air as a percentage of what it would be if saturated. So let's take a look in Edmonton, where you often get those dry, cold days of the winter. Say it was -20 with about 50% humidity. In those conditions, you'd only have about 0.6 grams of water per kilogram of air. It's not a lot of water. Okay, so let's head a little further to the east.
Well, here on PEI, we do have that damp or wet cold weather. And the reason is we're plunked in the middle of that giant bathtub of relatively warm water known as the ocean. So let's just say that it's -20, which doesn't happen all that often here on Prince Edward Island. -20 with very high humidity. No rain, no fog, just a very humid winter day. Nearly 100% relative humidity. If I were to take that air and wring it out like a giant washcloth, I would only end up with about 1.2 grams of water for every kilogram of air. So as you can see, that damp cold really isn't as damp as it might seem.
So what is making that difference? Well, you have to look at a bunch of factors. First is the wind. If you're getting a blustery -15-degree day on the coast, it will feel just as, if not colder than those frigid but calm -30-degree days on the prairies. Another is the sun. Often when it's really cold in the winter on the prairies, we're under a cold, calm, and clear air mass. That little bump of solar radiation may make a bit of a difference than if it's cloudy and damp. It's also what you're used to and how you dress for it. That Toronto peacoat has nothing on good old-fashioned layering. So staying dry is also key. And that's a lot harder to do if it's foggy or actually raining. When your clothes get wet, then yes, of course, you'll get that chill to the bone sensation. So what's the takeaway here? There are a lot of factors that will influence how cold you feel at a given temperature, but the humidity probably has the least to do with it. At the end of the day, no matter what you call it, cold is cold.
I feel like people will still fight about this. Up next, what do you do when your neighbor has the best Christmas lights on the block, or maybe in the city?
I had to do something pretty fancy to keep up with the neighbors.
So you get clever and witty. That story coming up in our moment. Well, this pretty incredible holiday display has been getting a lot of attention, but please spare a thought for his neighbor who is taking the hype in stride. And yep, that sign says ditto. So, I mean, what else are you supposed to do when there is just no way to keep up with the neighbors? You have to get creative, and that's our moment.
Well, when he was going above and beyond, I wanted to do something and figured I had to do something pretty fancy to keep up with the neighbors. So it took a lot of work and probably about 20, 30 hours of work to build it, but came across pretty nice.
And we didn't want to just do it, you know, with 20 lights. We wanted to make it perfect. So we took our time and we put as much effort into it to make sure that it complements his house. It's 1/4-inch plywood painted black, and there's about 600 lights. Each hole is pre-drilled and the lights are glued into place the perfect distance apart.
He loved it, which was good. We were kind of worried, but yeah, he was a big fan. Everyone seems to like it and get a good laugh out of it, and that's the whole reason we did it.
We had a lot of vehicles stop by and take pictures the very first night before it was even lit up. And they're such great neighbors too. They're really great to have next door.
Yeah.
So
it's fun having a little fun with them during the Christmas season.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I'm so glad that they explained how much work went into that sign, because honest to goodness, my first reaction was, that's a really nice sign. The resolution on that sign is unbelievable.
Well, it's a good thing. They might have to keep it up all summer because those neighbors also happen to have the very best lawn on the block.
Right.
That is a national for December the 8th. Good night.
Good night.